What is going on, CaneSport? It is Izubee Charles, and good morning to you all. It is August 24th, 2023, and I would like to thank everyone for joining us on Good Morning CaneSport. Today, I'm joined by Stephen Wagner as we break down the news of the day. First up this morning, your Miami Hurricanes news. We had plenty of coverage from teams practice yesterday with players weighing in on the season opener creeping up. I think we're about 7 days away from September 1st, where we open up the season against Miami, Ohio. We spoke to guys like the Brown brothers, Devontae Brown, Damari Brown, as well as defensive back Jaden Davis. So make sure to check out all that information on the site this morning. Also on the site this morning, we have a ton of recruiting updates for you guys. Starting off with 2024 commit JoJo Trader, who Steven spoke with a few days ago at Shamadan Madonna. Steven, JoJo's doing a bit of recruiting on his own, trying to get some more guys to join that 2024 class. What were your thoughts after talking to JoJo out there and seeing him at Shamadan Madonna?
Yeah, so Trader actually told me, and this is in the story, that if he's able to recruit Jeremiah Smith, the number one overall prospect in the country, 5-star receiver, like a freaking Julio Jones comparison, a guy who I think right now is going to be the next Marvin Harrison Jr. for Ohio State. If in fact he does end up going to the Buckeyes, I think he'll be the next Marvin Harrison Jr. Wherever he ends up playing college football at ultimately. Trader is trying to recruit J.J. Smith to Miami. And he said himself, if he's able to get Smith to the Hurricanes, that he might be the best recruiter in the country, or you can call him the best recruiter in the country. And I gotta say, if JoJo Trader pulls this off, yeah, he probably is going to be looked at as the best recruiter in the country. I mean, yeah, Kevin Beard's been very involved. Mario Cristobal has, blown up Jeremiah Smith's phone at every opportunity he's had. Really, the entire Miami staff has been really aggressively pursuing Jeremiah Smith. But if JoJo Trader is able to convince Jeremiah Smith to come to Miami, this really is going to be like one of the all-time greatest prospect recruitments that I think we've ever seen. Jeremiah has been pretty locked in with Ohio State. He's been very clear about that. Although he is continuing to visit some different schools. The big three in the state of Florida are among those schools that are still pushing for him. That's Miami, Florida, and Florida State. He's planning on attending games at all three of those schools, but JoJo Trader still doing everything he can to try to get his old buddy Jeremiah Smith to join him in Coral Gables. But Jeremiah is really making him battle for it.
Yeah, I can't imagine if JoJo was able to kind of help Miami pull that off. I know when JoJo committed to Miami, it was kind of surprising. Everybody went crazy. I could not imagine Twitter or X or whatever you want to call that reaction if JoJo kind of helps Miami with Jeremiah. So just a lot of good information in that story. And another thing that I saw in that story is Geno Smith is kind of playing a little bit of a role in this recruitment as well. He played Shannon Dawson at West Virginia, and now he's at Miami and kind of has that, connection with him that leads to Jeremiah. So a lot of good information in that story. So make sure to check that update on Jeremiah Smith. Switching to another local South Florida wide receiver that Miami's recruiting, Nebraska commit Ja'Cory Barney. He committed in early July, and it's one of those guys that we really thought Miami kind of made up for some lost time. And when he announced his commitment to Nebraska, kind of caught some people by surprise. But what isn't a surprise is Miami's continuing to recruit Ja'Cory Barney out of Miami Palmetto. Last year, they landed Bobby Washington. Years prior to that, Leonard Taylor, Brashard Smith. So Miami's done their fair share of recruiting at Miami Palmetto, and they're hoping that this guy, Ja'Cory Barney, is one of the next guys that kind of follows in that footsteps and going from Miami Palmetto to Coral Gables. About a 10 to 15-minute drive, so he's right around campus. He's seen campus plenty of times. He's a frequent visitor in the spring. And when I talked to him earlier this week, he pretty much told me Mario Cristobal is telling me, hey, they're not going to let up until pen hits paper, until I sign my national letter of intent to Nebraska. So a lot of interesting stuff in that story with Ja'Cory. Has to say he really wants to see Miami to continue to express, their love for him, to continue to show that they really want him to Coral Gables, and he'll see how things go. So he wants to see Miami make progress on the field and also with Kevin Beard and those receivers. So make sure to check that update out on another wide receiver target out of South Florida in Ja'Cory Barney. Sticking to another wide receiver, Malachi Tony, the 2026 American Heritage wideout that committed to Miami on Tuesday. Steven, you took it, did an analysis on him. You have a guy that you think is very, very similar to him, and I think a lot of Miami fans will like that comparison. So, who's the guy that you kind of compared Malachi Tony to?
Ray Joseph. And I think it's pretty apparent whenever you look at his film. Really versatile receiver who can kind of be moved all over the field, but he's going to make his money as a slot receiver. Now, he's 5'9" and listed at, I think, 168 pounds, but keep in mind, right now, he's a high school sophomore, so he still has 3 years to go before he's setting foot on a college campus. That means he's going to grow, he's going to put on weight, and he's going to continue to mature physically. But his speed, his route running intelligence, and kind of his ability to pick apart zone defenses and really attack the middle of the field, I think makes him a very, very good slot receiver. He plays bigger than his size, and he does a tremendous job of getting separation against really, really good cornerbacks as an outside receiver. Like I said, physically, he's not fully matured, and you shouldn't expect him to be fully matured as a sophomore, but a very, very good route runner, just has a really good natural feel for the game. Very fast, too, really kind of a speedy guy. He actually played on the 7-on-7 circuit with Jeremiah Smith and JoJo Trader and all the Chaminade Madonna kids. And whenever you look at Malachi Tony's film, you think to yourself, man, he's a 2026 guy, but if he was in the 2025 class, I don't think he'd miss a beat. And this is a guy who I firmly do believe, and I don't think I have any doubt in my mind about this, he is absolutely going to be a top 300 4-star prospect whenever those 2026 rankings actually come out. I know right now On3 released an initial watch list, but whenever On3 does its first formal ranking of the 2026 class, I firmly believe that Malachi Tony is going to be on that list. I definitely think he's going to be a top 300 prospect. It really wouldn't surprise me if he's in the top 150, kind of like Ray Joseph was. I think Joseph was the number 148 overall recruit in the On3 industry ranking whenever he ultimately signed with Miami. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Malachi Tony is somewhere in that same range. I mean, you look at what he did as a true freshman at American Heritage last year. He had almost 600 yards receiving. I think he had 7 or 8 touchdowns, 30-plus catches. And he's doing this as a true freshman against really, really good competition. I mean, kind of the first time that I think a lot of people kind of realized who he was last year on a nationally televised game against Los Alamitos from California in that Broward County showcase, where he only had 1 catch for 4 yards, and all that was a little corner fade touchdown reception. But that was a type of play that you think to yourself, holy cow, this is a true freshman making this against nationally ranked Division I corners. This guy can play. And we had a chance to see him on the 7-on-7 circuit. We also had a chance to see him compete for American Heritage at the Miami 7-on-7 prospect camps over the summer. Miami's had their eye on Malachi Tony for quite a while. And it's really, really easy to see why. This is a guy that I am really high on. I think he's going to have a tremendous sophomore year, and it would not surprise me at all if by the time that he's a senior, we look up and he's putting up 1,000-yard seasons at the high school level at American Heritage, which obviously being, pretty much a top 10 ranked team nationally every year, playing against really elite South Florida and national competition. This is a guy who can hang with the best of them, and I definitely expect him to be hanging with the best of them for the next 3 years. I think this is a name we're going to hear a lot of in the coming years.
Yeah, so to be exact with his stats, as a 13 or 14-year-old going against national powerhouses, Malachi Tony had 35 receptions, 621 yards, and 8 touchdowns. With Brandon Ennis, the 5-star Ohio State commit, on his team. So this kid really, really made a name for himself as a freshman in American Heritage last year. And just watching him and kind of talking to him a little bit throughout the season last year and seeing him in the summer, this is the most confident freshman I've ever spoken to in my life. I feel like I'm talking to, a kid that's a senior about to go into college. He's just so calm, cool, and collective. And he did that interview on ESPN when he made that, back shoulder fadeaway catch. He's like, hey, the guy simply can't guard me. I told my quarterback, check me to fade. We put the ball in the right place, and I made the catch. And just hearing that from a 14-year-old kid on national television in his first high school game, it's just like, all right, this kid has, potential to be special. And throughout the season, he really did show off that potential. I had another chance to watch him against Shamadan Madonna. He had 2 touchdowns against 4-star Florida State commit Edwin Joseph, and the rest of that secondary. That was a really, really good team. So this kid has shown, at a very young age that he can compete with the top dogs, and it seems like that's not going to slow down anytime soon. This year, I spoke with this coach recently. He's going to have a very, very big role as a top wide receiver, as just a sophomore in American Heritage. So they do expect a lot out of Malachi Tony. And another thing that his coach said that really surprised me was, out of all the NFL players, all the D1 guys, big time prospects that come out of American Heritage, Mike Smith, the head coach over there, thinks Malachi Tony has the best hands and ball skills he has ever seen just off of his freshman year. So hearing that from a head coach that's, coach guys like Sonny Michel, Patrick Surtain, and all those guys, that's really, really big to hear. And that's something that you should love to hear as a Miami Hurricanes fan. So very, very big get for Miami. I know it's a 2026 command. People say, hey, he has 3 more years of high school, things like that. But this is a very, very good step in the right direction for the Hurricanes and keeping top local guys home. So kudos to Mario Cristobal, Kevin Beard, and those guys over there for, showing Malachi Tony, hey, Miami's a perfect spot for you. But jumping back to one of our 2024 guys in recruiting, Elias Rudolph, a guy that Miami recently flipped from Michigan. Steven, you've been doing a really cool series when you're kind of previewing all the 2024 commits, senior seasons coming up. The latest guy that you spoke with and talked to was Elias Rudolph and his head coach. Just out of that conversation, just what are you expecting from Elias Rudolph for his senior year? He's back up in Ohio. A lot of people thought he was in Deerfield, finishing up his his high school career in Ohio. Just what are your expectations for this last year for Elias Rudolph?
Yeah, so I had a chance to talk to his head coach, and I asked, so with a guy like Elias, he's a 4-star recruit. He was very, very heavily, he was committed to Michigan at one point. Now he's committed to Miami. Kid who is extremely, extremely talented. You kind of ask yourself, well, what more do you really expect to see from a guy as a senior? And he told me, it's got to be consistency and domination on every single play, because he has moments right now that really just kind of blow you away and make you go, holy moly, what a player. This is a kid who is absolutely going to dominate at the Power 5 level. But his coach wants to see him do that on every single down. He wants teams to be terrified of running the ball to Elias Rudolph's side. He wants double teams and triple teams. He wants chips. He wants blocks and releases every single time on Elias Rudolph. He wants opponents to have to construct an entire game plan on how they can avoid Elias Rudolph. So that's really what they want to see there. He did play pretty well in his actual season opener. Should be noted that he had his formal season opener last week, and this week is actually going to be his second game of the season. But last week, I believe he had 5 total tackles. 2 or 3 of those were for losses. And then he also had, I believe it was a 40-something yard fumble return. He had a 40-something yard fumble return. So really with Rudolph, I think the name of the game there is just going to be consistency. But given what he's already accomplished, a lot of people are very impressed with Elias Rudolph already. Like we said, he's obviously been talented enough that he's been recruited very heavily by Miami, by Michigan, by Ohio State, by Pittsburgh. I believe Pitt was another school that was kind of in the mix for Elias Rudolph there late. We saw a lot of what he was capable of last season and the year before that. This is going to be his third year as a starter. He came off of a really, really big campaign last year, and he's a guy who Miami's going to plan on using him at the jack position, kind of a hybrid linebacker / defensive end type role. He's currently a true edge and occasionally plays a little bit of interior defensive line right now at Taft, but definitely has the size to end up playing linebacker. I think has the speed to play that jack position as well. I think the biggest one is just going to be kind of mental awareness. But on the bright side, one thing that his coach told me he's been very, very impressed with was Elias's understanding of film study. Kind of learning how to really study film beyond just looking at your highlight plays. And finding clips that finding clips that you want to cut up and keep for yourself. Kind of really learning, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And how am I going to need to correct this? What are my opponent's tendencies and how can I exploit that? How can I be prepared for what my opponent is going to do? So there's definitely been some mental maturity there, but I think we're going to be looking for even more mental maturity on the field, just in terms of overall feel and overall awareness of the game, which is honestly what you look for from any high school recruit.
Yeah, Elias is a guy that I was, really hoping that he stayed down here in South Florida, plays high school football at Deerfield. But he's going to be a guy that really keep my eye on because, like you mentioned, he's a very high motor guy, very aggressive guy. But just the little fine tuning things and kind of molding him into a all around complete player is something that we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on this year. So make sure to check out that update with Miami commit Elias Rudolph. And Steven, it's Thursday morning right now. We're about to head out to some football games later this afternoon with week 1 of the high school schedule finally kicking off. We've got a ton of games this week, including the one later today with Luke Nickel facing off against Western, with Milton coming down from Georgia in that Broward showcase. And on Saturday, we have the big dogs coming to play, Shamadon Madonna versus St. Francis, St. Thomas Aquinas versus St. John Bosco, and a big game in American Heritage as well. I'm personally most excited to see Luke Nickel for the first time live in person, along with those other games like I mentioned, Aquinas and Shamadon Madonna. Steven, with week 1 kicking off here in South Florida, our first time to see these guys in a long time put on these patches. What game are you most excited about? What are some players you really want to see this weekend?
Man, I think it's got to be that Chaminade St. Francis game. You're talking about two, honestly, probably top 10 teams in the country going at each other. St. Francis, I think, can kind of be called the IMG Academy of the Northeast, because really that's what it's become in recent years. You look at the overall talent on both sides of the ball. I mean, heck, I would imagine that every single player on both of these teams, every single player on the field is going to ultimately end up going Division I. And in fact, I would probably be pretty surprised if there's a kid on either of those rosters that doesn't end up going Division I. And more likely than not, I'm guessing probably Power 5. But this is going to be definitely, I think, probably the best competition that Jeremiah Smith and JoJo Trader are going to face from a secondary standpoint. St. Francis' secondary is a little bit young, but still extremely, extremely talented. I expect Smith and Trader to both be very heavily tested, and I think this is going to give Miami fans a really good idea of kind of where JoJo Trader, who right now is the highest ranked commit in Miami's 2024 class. I think this is going to give Miami fans a really good idea of just where Trader sits at the start of his senior year, kind of where he needs to improve, what he does well. It's going to be a really, really good benchmark. And then obviously Jeremiah Smith, that's going to be a player that really everyone watching that game on ESPN is going to be watching very, very closely. Don't sleep on the St. Thomas Aquinas game later that afternoon, though.
You're going to mention that next, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we're going to be seeing O.J. Frederick and Ryan Mack, Miami's two secondary commits. OJ is going to be playing corner and a little bit of wide receiver. And then Ryan Mack, he's really right now, he's playing more corner than he is anything else, but Miami's recruiting him at nickel. We do expect to see him a little bit at nickel on Saturday. So that's going to be a game that we're going to be watching very, very closely too. There is a lot going on on Saturday, and there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, no better way to kick off the high school season than having, some of the best schools from across the country come down to South Florida, bang it out with some of the best that Broward County has to offer. So just stay tuned on CaneSport.com for all the updates and all your recruiting tidbits that we will have throughout today and the rest of the weekend. And as always, any other things that may pop up. For Stephen Wagner, I'm Izubee Charles. Thank you for joining us this morning and have a great rest of your day.